All right. Welcome everybody to today's online webinar with Oya. She will be talking about service creation via .NET Core templates. Very interesting one. I've seen it before already. Very excited to see you here. Hi, Oya.
Yeah, very excited to be here too.
And I should actually share also those slides. So here you have the title again for today. We will be, sorry, let me switch the screens. We will be recording this, so it will be available in a couple of days. So just to truncate a little from the front. If you're interested, you can ask questions. We will try to ask Oya either during the presentation if it fits, otherwise at the end. So feel free to stay here, join Oya, and see some goodness with .NET service templates. Okay, this should be it. I'm a bit confused with my slides. So let's switch over to Oya's slides, and the stage is yours.
Yeah, so once again, really excited to be here. I'm sure you all are too, except for that one person yawning at his computer. So you're going to want to get some coffee because you're not going to want to miss this. I'm really good at bad jokes. Anyway, so you thought that my presentation was titled Service Creation via .NET Core Templates, but it's actually .NET Templates, a love story. Gotcha. It's still the same content though. And the reason that I say that is because it's such a great tool and I'm really excited to talk about it. And the background for this slide was actually was actually chosen with intent, because just like the templates will shape the resulting service that you get, so does, putting a cutout hole in front of a lens to change those blur bubbles into hearts. So that will shape those bubbles. So I know, a little bit cheesy. I could actually show you. And that's what I have my lights set up for. I don't know if you can actually see this, but these change into little hearts. Maybe I'm a little small, so anyway, just trust me that it's working. So let's get to it. So as far as the content of today, it's pretty general. I want to talk about what the issue that I was trying to solve that made me turn to .NET templates was. Then kind of talking to you and giving you a little bit of an overview about what .NET templates are and how useful they are. And then I want to show you a demo of a service that you can spin up from start to deploying resources in the cloud. So from start to finish, very cool stuff. Yeah. So as far as the reasoning goes, at my company, we had a bit of a problem. We had this monolithic solution, so we're that is incredibly intertwined, or that was incredibly intertwined. We were trying to practice domain-driven development, but it's really difficult because certain domains were in multiple sections of other people's domains, and everybody was always stepping on each other's toes. And so as a result, our pull requests were huge, and they involved a lot of teams sign-offs. And so there wasn't a whole lot of love between the teams as far as that goes. And not to mention, breaking this out or breaking this solution apart was very difficult, especially making the time for it with continuous pressure to pump out features. Sometimes it was even difficult to convince the stakeholders of the necessity of breaking this thing apart. So as a result, it took years for certain teams to be able to break their pieces out into their own services that they can manage themselves and deliver to more efficiently. So we were hoping to find something as my team, we were hoping to find something that would help other teams ease that process. So they can basically take their business logic out and put it somewhere else that's already broken out. Granted, you might have to do some tweaks, especially if you're changing, say, from .NET Framework to .NET Core. There are a lot of big changes. But as far as like the business logic goes, a lot of it can be less intensive than having to try to set this thing up from scratch and wire everything up. So we wanted to be able to do that for the teams. So then, even though it's important knowledge to have, they can always go back and learn it a little bit more, but at least this way they'll be able to break out, be able to continue working on their features, be able to continue being efficient, and then, add as needed and go back as needed. So yeah, so our lonely code base is dreaming of quick lead times, non-painful PRs, and long walks on the beach. We're looking for the ideal tool to help it get out of its monolithic shell and travel to new repos. And so we're looking into a couple of different solutions, but .NET Templates is a really great one because it's something that's already existing if you have .NET Core installed, a 2.2 or higher. And this will allow us to standardize on certain tooling and naming conventions because, even though we want to enable our teams to be autonomous, there are certain times that you want to at least agree on specific tools. Especially if you have to worry about having different tools that do the same thing and both consuming licenses. So that's really helpful as well. So off to .NET Templates. And what is this awesome tool? So .NET Templates, it's an open source tool that basically does like find and replace, but it's a little bit beefier. It comes with, you basically define a JSON file and you put it in wherever you want your project to start. So if you have a JSON file and you're telling it what sort of replacements you want it to do, it will look in the service that you create and it'll replace those files for you. But like I said, there's a lot more than that. It allows so many other options, and it can be used with anything that can be opened in a text editor. So it's not just limited to .NET. You can create Python services with it. You can create, YAML pipelines. You can create, infrastructure as code. You can do anything. You can have a diary in a template if you wanted to, even though I don't know how that's going to work out for you, but you can if you wanted to. And you can categorize it in different ways, so you can sort by what type of templates you have. And it looks a little bit like this. So what I have in front of me is a template pack. So basically, you can package up multiple templates together and install them together and use them, one at a time if you needed to. But the way that it knows where a template starts is where that template config folder sits. So anything inside of that or inside of the same folder will become a template. So if you have something outside of that, say in my template pack folder, it won't recognize that at all. So it doesn't matter what you have there, but you can have multiple templates by defining multiple of these template configs, which is really cool. So some of the things that you can actually do with it. So I mentioned variable replacements and folder and file renames. So that's really good if you wanted to name your service something, or you wanted to change the author on something because a different team owns the different service. So you want to change that to whatever team name it is. Or if you want to rename certain folders and files, which is separate than the actual content of those files. You can actually also jam certain parameters together. So you can have them act as one based on the behavior. And I'll show you an example of that in my demo. And you can also generate certain things like ports. Port generation is really, really helpful, especially if you're doing local installs of your service, and you need a specific port to be set because you don't want any port conflicts. So you can give it a range of ports, and the cool thing about it is it'll choose a port and it'll make sure that that's not a port that's already taken on your computer, even if it's within that range. So it'll do the checking for you. And the same thing can happen with numbers, dates, and GUIDs. They all generate their respective pieces. File inclusions and exclusions. So you can include or exclude certain files based on a parameter that you define. So say you wanted to add a specific configuration file, but only in a specific scenario. So you can, if you need it, you can include it if like a specific switch is set to true, or you can exclude it if it's set to false. And you can do the same thing with control statements inside of the code itself. So they look like preprocessor directives, and you can actually not. At first, I thought you can only add them to C# files or .NET specific files, but apparently you can actually add them to other files as well. You can add them to Python files. You can add them to JSON files and everything. So if you wanted to include or exclude specific blocks of code, say you're wiring something up and you don't particularly want to wire this thing up if you're not going to use it, you can exclude it or include it with a switch, with the switch that you define that is set to true or false. And like I said, I'll go more into that. I'll definitely show you more of that when I go into the demo piece. Some of the other pieces, some of the other things that you can do that are really useful are post-action scripts. So post-action scripts are a set of predefined types of scripts that you can run, or types of actions that you can run. One of them might be running a script. Another one might be adding something to a solution file, or maybe another one adding permissions. One of the caveats with .NET templates is if you use like .NET NuGet Pack, it will strip the execute permissions from all of your shell scripts. So one of the post-action scripts that you can do is be able to add those execute permissions back, especially if they're build scripts or something like that. So that could be very useful. Another thing it supports is placeholders. So if you wanted to define a repo structure, but you don't really want to put files in a specific folder yet, you just want people to know where certain files go, you can put a placeholder in a folder, and then when you invoke the template, the placeholder file will no longer be there, but the folder will still remain. So if you needed to add something to it, you can add it. But if you didn't have that placeholder file, the folder will get ignored and it will not get created. So that's also another very useful tool. And there's plenty more where that came from. They have a wiki on their templating repo. And I mean, it's easy to Google, but if you need the link to it, I can always give that as well. But yeah, definitely try it out and go crazy. So lots of useful things. I know everybody's really happy right now and has a whole bunch of gears going in their heads of what you can use those things for. So let's take this thing out on a date and see what it's all about. So I decided to create a demo service. And when I say service, I mean to be very general with it, because your service can be, like a top shelf service running on a Windows machine, or it could be an API, or it could be something else. But that's the thing is, it could be anything you want it to be as long as you can template it out, which you should be able to. In this case, I chose an API as my service. So this is what my folder looks like. And as I mentioned before, it knows that the template starts where this template config folder starts. So when I go to install this template, all of this extra stuff that's not in the service demo folder will be gone and excluded. And I'll go into what these things are a little bit later. So as far as this goes, so I created a new API, and I used the already existing web API that Microsoft already provided because there are predefined templates that you can also use, but you can also define your own, which is cool. So they have this one that is basically a weather forecast app, just so you can see, what a controller might look like. I just kept all of that stuff there, but I added to it. And I added a few things to it. Some of it is not very relevant, but some of it will be helpful for us to make sure that it's working. Like I added a health check to it, just a general health check. I added an open API so we can hit the swaggram point. I added some automation to it as well. So because, like I said, this is an end-to-end solution. So you can create the repo, but it'll create the pipeline for you. It'll create the cloud resources for you. When you push it to your remote repo, which it'll create for you, it'll automatically push that code to those resources that you created. And so here, one of the automation pieces that I have defined is a build project using Nuke. So this will help me make sure that my builds are consistent locally and on a build server. So I have it doing, your restores or your clean restore compile, but it also does like testing and publishing as well. Another piece of automation that I have is Terraform. So Terraform, if you're not familiar with it, is infrastructure as code. And this is what creates my resources in the cloud. In this case, I'm using Azure, but you can use, AWS or Google Cloud Platform. You can use something else for infrastructure as code as well. It doesn't have to be Terraform. But this is creating basically a resource group for me and two resources that it's going to put in that resource group. It's going to create my web API resource that I can push my code to. And then it's going to create an application insights resource to be able to monitor my application. And one last piece of automation is this GitHub action. Here, I run our build script that I can also run locally, and it does a compile, test, and publish. And then it pushes my code to that web app that I'm going to create in Azure. There is one manual step I have to do, and I'll go into it when I show it off. But you most likely won't have to do it. The only reason that I'm doing it is because I don't have a defined service account that I can use to push that. And so I'm using something else. But as I said, you might have something that's already predefined. So as long as they have that pipeline, they might be good. And so let's go into the actual template config file. And what am I doing? What kind of options do we have? So this is what the template.json looks like. Some of the useful or some of the standard things that you might see in here are the JSON schema, which is great if you needed code completion as well. So in case you wanted to see what options are available to a specific parameter. I put myself down as the author because I authored this template. There are certain classifications, and let me actually show what those look like so I can show you them side by side. So to be able to create a new template, or to be able to see what templates I have, I could just run .NET new, and it'll show me a list of already existing templates. And these are all included with .NET Core. None of these I added. So if I'm looking at my classifications, all of these API code and reference, all of that goes with these tags. So this is what you're going to see right here in the tags column. The identity of the template is a unique identifier, and you're not going to see it as the standard output for .NET New, but it is a unique identifier for the template. You will see the name of the template, and that'll come out under the templates column. You will see demo template. The short name is going to match up with the short name here. And in my case, I called it demo-template. So that's what you're going to see there. And then the tags, which can be a little bit confusing, are C# and item. So the language is C#. So it'll show up here as a C# template. And then the item type will not show up, but it's something that you can use to filter. As a standard, or right from the get-go, you can use item templates or project templates. And some of these are classified as one or the other. And it's useful if you're looking to try to figure out what kind of projects you have available that you can add to your solution versus everything else. So if I go to filter by, if you wanted to see what options are available to you, you would just go to .NET New --help. And even though it'll spit out all of your templates, it'll give you a lot of information at the top here as well. So if we wanted to filter by type, I can just use .NET New type, and I can look at everything that's a project template. And these are all the things that I can add to my solution or the solution itself. So these are all separate new projects that I could create for you. But if I wanted to do an item, which is basically a catch-all for everything else, it'll show me all of the config files that I have available, and then the solution file. I think that's categorized under both. But yeah, I can have a web config file, a NuGet config file, a couple of others. So that's what that type is for. It's for filtering out the types of templates you have. And so there's also the source name parameter. And this is basically what it's going to replace a specific keyword in your template with the project name. So basically, if I do a .NET New and I use this template, it's going to look at anywhere that any occurrence of service demo, which is the keyword that I'm using to replace, and it's going to replace that with if I don't have anything provided, it's going to replace it with the name of the directory that I'm currently in. Or if I use the -n switch, I can provide my own name if I wanted to. And so this is going to go in, and it's going to replace service demo. It's going to replace, the service demo piece in the API. It's going to replace anything like my namespace. It's going to replace this piece, anywhere that it sees that occurrence. And you can also do this a separate way, which is the way that I was doing it before, but I decided to kind of go back to this way because I feel like most people are going to be using it this way. But I had a different way of doing it as well. And I wanted to keep it because I wanted to show you how file renames work. But if I keep something like this, this piece, it'll work the same way, except it won't pull the directory name as the service name. So I'm basically defining a parameter, and this is a parameter that I can pass in with the command line when I'm creating the template. And it shows that it's a string parameter, and it gives me, I can give you a description of it. So when you do like a .NET New template name --help, it'll show you that defined parameter, and it'll show you that description. So you know what that parameter is for. You can give it a default value So if I don't have this as a required parameter and it needs to default to something, it'll change any occurrence of service demo to generic. But you can have that be something else if you wanted to as well. But this way, this works slightly differently. The file rename piece will make sure that the service demo, any occurrence in any files or folders, like the actual names of the files or folders that this contains service demo, those will get replaced. But it won't replace the content of those files. And vice versa, if you use the replaces keyword, it'll only replace the content of those files or folders, but it won't replace the actual names of the files or folders. So I wanted to show you that because it gives you a little bit more of a breakdown of what you can do and how granular you can be. But ultimately, I decided instead of using that, I'm going to use source name. And here, I can reference that parameter, that service demo parameter in here. And I could take what this parameter is, and I can have some other parameter act on it. So what I mean by this, and this is a little bit confusing because this is calling name when it's source name. This is also part of the reason that I wasn't sure if I wanted to go with this, because normally you would just use the parameter name in here that you defined. But in order to call this source name piece, you would have to reference it by name. So when I say name, it doesn't reference this name, it references the source name, which, like I said, can be a little bit confusing. But basically, I'm passing in this source name to this other type of parameter, and it's a generated parameter. And what it does is it switches the casing. So this is a type casing generator. There are multiple other types of generators. Like I said, there's the port generators, number generators as well. So in this case, I'm basically performing this to lower, and I'm setting it to true. So anytime I see the occurrence of service demo lowercase, I'm going to replace it with whatever I input as the name of my service, and I'm going to replace that occurrence, those occurrences, with the lowercase version of my name. And that matters. That's being applied in Terraform. And I'll show you. I want my resources to be lowercase in this case. So I'm creating my resources. I'm creating my web API. I'm creating my resource group. I'm creating my application insights instance. And I want them all to be lowercase. But I don't want to have to pass in multiple parameters. Like, I don't want to have to pass in the parameter for the regular naming and the parameter for lowercase naming. It's the same thing. So I wanted it to take care of that for me. And so that's exactly what this piece does. I also have a true-false switch available as well. And this will either remove or include or exclude my automation pieces. So my automated builds, my GitHub actions, and my Terraform. Like, what if I just wanted to create the repo and I just wanted to play with the API? I don't really care about the builds or, creating resources yet. I just want to see what's in here and just explore a bit. And that's totally valid. So I defined a parameter that allows you to turn the automation piece on or off. So what this does is so what this does is a little bit further down. I have these modifiers in this section called sources. And as you can see, right here, it's set to exclude all of these files from being included in the template. So if I have them for whatever reason and I'm not removing them, I don't want them to be included in whatever the resulting template is. So I'm removing them. And this doesn't have any condition. This is always going to be excluded. Now here, I have another exclude, and this one is based on that use automation switch that I had defined that's either true or false. And in this case, if I don't want to use automation, it'll exclude all of my all of the files associated, all of the files and folders associated with builds and with the builds and with my GitHub Actions and with my Terraform. I don't want any of those. And it's also referenced in my CS_proj file as well, because I'm adding or removing that nuke project, that build project. So I need to have something in my solution. And here you can see me using those conditionals, and they're referencing that parameter. So if that parameter is true, it's true by default. So if I'm not, passing anything in, it'll automatically include this build project. But if it's false, it'll make sure to remove that project from the solution as well, so we're not running into any conflicts. So it's very handy. If we go further down, I have some post actions defined. So those post action scripts, one of them is, like I said, when I package my template to distribute it, I want to make sure that you're able to execute certain scripts. So my automation script, my build automation script, and my GitHub action, it references that. So if my GitHub action doesn't see that it has execute permissions, it's going to run into issues on my build server. So I want to make sure that this build.sh script has the execute permission set back onto it. So that's exactly what this does. It checks to make sure it's not a Windows computer, because I'm not running shell scripts on a Windows computer unless you're using like WSL. But in that case, I don't think it's going to show up as Windows NT, but I could be wrong on that. So more to experiment with. So there's a description of what this does. I can change it if I needed to. If I'm not running scripts, or I'm choosing not to run scripts, then it'll give me the manual instructions of running it. So if for whatever reason I don't want to run it on the creation of my service, I can run it later, and then this will tell me how. And then it has an action ID, and this is predefined. You can see all of what action IDs are available to you on the .NET template wiki, and this one is specifically set to do the chmod. And here you're adding that execute bit. So you're running chmod plus X, and you're running it on any occurrence of a shell script. So in here, I have multiple shell scripts, right? I have this build shell script, and I have this initialize git repo shell script, which creates my remote repo for me and creates a local repo and does my first commit in here automatically, so I don't have to worry about it. But I want that one to run as well. So I'm running it on all of my shell scripts. This could be dangerous depending on what scripts you have. And you might want to define the specific script you want to run it on. But in this case, I only have the two, so I'm not too worried about it, and this is a demo. Another one I have is this running initialize git repo shell script. And that's, like I said, it's creating a new repo for me remotely, and then it creates a local one, and it commits all of the code from the initial creation into the repo. So this does the same thing. It has a different action ID, and this one is just for running scripts, I believe. And then I gave it a description as well. I gave it some manual instructions as well in case you don't want to run it. So that's that. That's the post action script. And one more thing that I didn't show you was I have this scripts directory in case somebody wants to say put in like install scripts if they wanted to run it locally. I don't have any install scripts to give them right now because I'm not expecting this to be run locally, but they might have some other scripts that are associated with their project. So I added this placeholder file there. And once I actually create the service from this template, it's going to go away. But this folder, the scripts directory, is still going to be there. So yeah, As far as the template, this is what I have defined. So let's see it in action. Actually, before I get to that, let's talk about packaging really quick. So I can install my template one of two ways. I can install it from the source code itself. So I can basically run .NET new -i for install, and I could just say this directory because this is where my template source code is. Or I can install it from a package. So if I have a NuGet feed set up, I can just pull down the package that whatever I call that package, basically. So in my case, I have this package settings csproj. I'm not using a new spec file for this, but I'm using a csproj file for this because you can use csproj files for packing. And in this case, I'm only using it for packing. And I'm defining it as a template type. And so this is basically going to go in, and it's going to package up my template. So I also have some automation on this. And this is anytime I push to remote, it's going to kick off a GitHub action that's going to do a .NET pack using that package settings csproj. It's going to output it into an artifacts directory, and it's going to version it, and it's going to, and I'm giving it the repo URL that I'm packaging. And then it's going to push to Artifactory. Artifactory is where I'm choosing to host my packages. So basically here, I was logged in before, but that's okay. This is where my package actually lives. So this is where it pushes it to. It uses a secret that I have defined in my repo. If you have your own NuGet feed, it might be like your organization might already have a secret defined that you can already use. And it's going to send it to my Artifactory feed. You can use like myget or anything else as well, whatever you choose to use as your NuGet feed. So that's what I'm doing. So now let's see the result. So I'm going to install this template, and I'm going to install it from my NuGet package because I already have my NuGet feed configured, and I already know that this ran because I have access to my my GitHub account. I could look at my repository, and I could see in my actions that this pushed to my, that this packed and pushed to Artifactory, and I have this package. So everything is done successfully. So I'm pretty confident that I can now run the .NET New on that package. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to install it, right? So that doesn't create the project for me. That just installs it. So, and it's installed here as this demo template, as we saw, that was defined in our template config. So now I want to create a new directory, and I'm going to call it, actually, if anybody else wants to give me a name, just so you know that I'm not using a predefined name. Or I'll call it some, call it the best demo ever. And I'm going to go into that. And so I'm going to do a .NET New. And I'm going to, I think we called it demo template. So I think you can make, you can set up code completion for this. I don't have it done here at the moment, but so I'm gonna see what I have available to me. So I'm gonna do a -- help, and we have two things available for us. We have allow scripts, which basically allows me to turn off running scripts when I create this. And then we have use automation. We don't have a service name parameter, but we can use the -n to feed it a name. But that's something that isn't one that you define. That's something that's already predefined. Or like I said, it'll take the directory name. And we want to use automation, so I don't have to tell it to use automation because it's already set to true. So I'm going to do .NET new demo template, and I'm just going to call it that. And it's going to ask me, so I'm running the script to create my remote repository and local repository. And so it just tells me that it basically just asks me if I want to run it. And if I don't, it's going to tell me that I have to run the script if I want to. And it uses the GitHub CLI to create the remote repo. So if you look at my projects again, I have this new repository, and it's called the best demo ever. There's nothing in it yet, but this already did a commit. So if I do a git log, we can see that there is already an initial commit. And there is nothing else to commit. So it already committed everything that we created. So let's see what this thing looks like. So I'm going to open up this in Writer, and I'm going to go to the best demo ever, which is what we just created. And I'm going to, so let's look at it. As you can see, there are no like packaging pieces that are involved with packaging the template. Like those aren't part of it. You can see that all of our stuff has been renamed to the best demo ever. If we look at our startup, our namespace is also the best demo ever. Our Terraform, if we look at the resources, it's also replaced those lowercase versions with the best demo ever, which is really cool. So I could probably run it now. I can, run nuke to build my solution, and it's going to automatically compile it because it's set as the default target. It's going to do a clean and restore before that. So it compiles fine. If we do a .NET run, I can't type when people are looking at my screen, so yeah. And I'm going to go into my, I'm going to run my, -- project. So I'm going to run my solution or my API project, and I have it set to run on port 5001, which is the default that that it's set to run to from the template I used to create the weather controller app. So you can see our open API. We can check the weather forecast, try it out. So it's all working, right? And we could also check the health check, and we know it's up and running. That's pretty much all it tells me. It doesn't tell me anything else. So, I'm good with this. I know it's running. I haven't put any business logic into it now, or yet, so I don't have to. I'm not going to check anything else. So I'm ready to create my resources in the cloud. So this is a manual step, and I made this manual because I'm assuming that you're going to want to check this out first before you actually run or before you actually create the resources. So I'm going to go into my Terraform file, and I'm going to do a Terraform. So you're going to have to log into Azure CLI to do this. I should already be logged in, but let me double check. I have to take this off screen for a second to make sure that I have the right subscription set. And I do. So now I'm going to do a Terraform init. And this is going to initialize the backend. Oh, I still have to sign in. Never mind. I thought it was signed in. Cool. I'm signed in. So I'm going to run our Terraform init. It's going to initialize the backend. And then I'm going to do Terraform apply to create those resources. If you're not familiar with Terraform, that's totally okay. I'm just basically creating the resources in the cloud. And I have some predefined resources. So our web apps run on something called an app service plan, if you're not familiar with Azure, which is basically a virtual machine that runs your web apps for you. So I'm assuming that this is centrally managed somewhere because you can have multiple web apps running on an app service plan. But if you decided you wanted to create that with Terraform too, you totally can. But right now I'm creating it on top of that virtual machine. And it shows me that I have 3 resources that I'm going to create. I'm going to create the resource group, the application insights, and the actual web application that I defined. So I'm ready to do this. So I'm going to say yes. And in the meantime, while that's deploying our resources, these are my predefined resources that I have, which is that app service plan, which is that virtual machine, and a storage account. And this storage account holds my Terraform states. And you can see that the best demo ever was able to reach out to that storage account and create a state file there. You don't have to worry about what it is, but the naming convention is there and everything, which is what I was mostly worried about. So it's still creating. We can, it already created the resource group. So I can already see the best demo ever resource group here. And it already created our application insights, but it's still creating the API itself. Give it a little bit more time. I hope everybody's having fun. Okay, great. So I was able to create the API, and it hasn't showed up yet. So refresh this. There we go. There it is. So, and I wanted to give it the naming convention of service, and then whatever the API name is, and then API. So it was able to follow that. So if I go in here, I should get like our just generic welcome page because I haven't pushed anything to it, and I do. And so now I'm ready to push code to it. Now this is another manual step that I have to do. This is the manual step that I was talking about that you might not have to do because you might already have a service account created for your organization. But because I don't, I need this publish profile to be part of my repository in order for me to run that GitHub action to be able to push to it. And as part of Terraform, I gave it a post-deployment script to basically spit out the contents of that publish profile here. So I'm doing that to make it a little bit easier, so that way, and all of that is generated. So to make it a little bit easier for myself to be able to add it to my secrets, so I don't have to worry about an extra step there. So I'm going to go to my repository and I'm going to go to my secrets. I'm going to add a new secret, and I'm going to call it Azure Web App Publish Profile to match what is in my GitHub action, because it's using this Azure Web App Publish profile to publish or to push the application to my web app. So now that I have that, I'm going to add this secret. And so now I have that. And now I'm ready to commit my I'm ready to commit my code or push my code. It's already been committed, so I'm going to do a git push origin. And so it already knows what my origin is because it's already set in that script, or what my remote is. So when I go back to actions, now that I have code in here that I pushed, it automatically picked up that GitHub action, and it's going to do our build, test, and publish, and it's going to push the code to our web application running in Azure. We're almost done, I promise. But while that's happening, there is one more caveat that I wanted to talk about when you're packaging your template. And that is if you have a new spec file somewhere within your template that you wanted to add to the template itself, you didn't want it to be used in the packaging, they might get ignored. They will get ignored when you're packaging them, so you won't actually see them in the resulting template, even if you include them explicitly in the CS_proj file. So in order to get around this, I had a need for that. And instead of calling my new spec files with the extension of .newspec, I changed it to the extension of .newspec file. So that way it'll pick it up. And then I have a rename in my template. So when I create the service itself, it'll rename all of the occurrences that it sees of new spec file to new spec. So that's like one of the little caveats. If you ever run into an issue like that, that's how you can solve it. You can rename it temporarily and then name it back when you create the service. And that's all done automatically for you through that, through what you have in your template.json. So now that it's been deployed, we can refresh this and we get a 404, and that's okay because it's an API. There's nothing that it has that's being presented, but I can go to our health check and I can see that it's healthy. And then I could go to Swagger for OpenAPI and I could see that working there as well. And I could see my weather forecasts and try it out. So yeah, it's been deployed. How cool is that? I mean, I was explaining a lot of this stuff to you as I was doing it, so it took a little bit longer, but this could be done in minutes because all of the code is already there for you. Everything is predefined. So all you have to do is just check to make sure that your code is running fine. And then when you're ready, you can push it off to your web app and you can create those resources all with a few commands. And one last thing is I want to go to my application insights to make sure that I'm able to monitor my application and that it is wired up correctly. And if I go, I can see that, there was a failed request. That was probably our 404, right? So I can go into, say, the performance of our endpoints. I swear there's something. Availability. Maybe it didn't refresh yet because that should be, oh no, it's going to make a liar out of me. Maybe it hasn't set yet. I promise you this was working. Okay. Well, I'm going to look into that. I've created this multiple times and it was working every time. So of course, during the demo, it doesn't work. And I'm going to have to see why that's happening. Let me try live metrics and see if I can see anything right away. And refresh this. Do I get execute, get a 200. So it is seeing something cool. Even though it's not, oh, there you go. It just took a while to show up, but you can see all of my actions here. Okay, so we're good. It's able to monitor it fine. So yeah, it's been done. So the only other thing that I can show you is basically what happens if we don't want automation. And I'll make a boring repo directory. And we can also do a .NET new. Oh. Actually, we don't want that. .NET new, and then use automation. False. Oh, you know what? It already created my repo. Okay, or my code. Okay, so I want to do use automation false. So even though it's still asking me if I want to run that script, but that's because I didn't include or exclude that one from my repo, from like using that switch to run. And as you can see, there's no Terraform directory, there's no build directory. There's also no GitHub directory. So all of that stuff has been removed. So I can just play around with it with my .NET commands, or using the .NET CLI, or using whatever IDE tools I needed to build. So if I wanted to, I could play around with it like that. But all in all, this is pretty much the demo, but I hope you can see how powerful this tool really is. Because like I said, you can use it for so many other things. It's not limited to just .NET. You can use it for Python. You can use it for Ruby. You can use it for whatever you want. So I hope that you love these as much as I do. They really helped our organization out with at least being able to streamline our service creations. And I'm hoping that you will be able to find use for it in your own organization. And with that said, are there any questions, or what questions do you all have for me? Or how are we taking questions?
I will be joining for taking questions. First of all, thanks Oya for the presentation and for the best demo ever. Even though the demo gods were sleeping for a moment, really cool stuff. Let's wait for some questions. Usually they might take a while. But I'm also gonna kick off one of the things, or one thing that I really like is this auto commit that you're doing. I mean, I remember I don't set up new projects very often, but if you're adding the git ignore file, and then some things are ignored which you want to commit, some others are not, and then they're unstaged, etc., not added, all those things, that's pretty cool. So generally, response on chat, very good. I will add one question. Hopefully some others will join. How do you recommend updating things? I mean, if you set up your template in a way, but then let's say you change the build process, or you change some of the startup.cs file. I mean, I'm totally not into that part of the demo, but how would you update those with with projects that you've already set up. Is that possible in some way?
So it is possible, but it's very crude, at least in my own opinion, because if you have, so you saw how it, when it saw that I had a repo already created, or how I already had part of the template already created, it's telling me that it's going to override all of these files. But in order for me to do that, I have to use the force switch. Um, so I can use that to update certain files that haven't been touched. Now, if you're somebody who uses this template and has already like done some extra stuff to it that you might need, maybe there was something that we don't have standards on yet, but you needed a tool and you added it to startup, like that. If you use the force switch, then to like say update something in that, it's going to override that file. However, you can still use that for certain files that are never getting touched. So if you're not expecting, if you're, you know, using or trying to update, say like your build.sh or build.ps1, which are automatically generated, right? So if you wanted to update those, and if nobody is touching those, you can use the force, anyway, you can use the force switch to override those. But so like I said, it's a little bit crude, but that
so also to make it a bit more sufficient, needs some manual steps probably too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
so I'm actually using also .NET templates for maintaining the plugin template for everyone who's interested in getting started with ReSharper and Writer plugins. And I'm using this very extensively too. I went through some of the things that you've mentioned as well, including the new spec file, which was very surprising at first. But yeah, very cool stuff. I do have a second question. From the audience, the response is mostly, yeah, this rocks, and I'm definitely going to look out or check this out. I do have a second question, and we talked about that before, but maybe it's interesting for the audience still. Can you test templates in some way?
Yes. So right now, I think the best way to test them is probably using unit tests. You can test them in other ways as well. But there's also a way that I saw on the .NET templating piece, but
what does unit testing mean? Is it like the normal workflow of, let's say, packing the template and then extracting it and then comparing the file outputs? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. There's also this piece, but like I said, it hasn't really, or like I mentioned before to you, like it hasn't really been updated since 2017, but it looks like there might be a different way of testing it, but I'm having a little bit of trouble like wrapping my head around this one. But if somebody knows how it works, definitely let me know, because I am curious. And but this is on their wiki page. So yeah, so this is another possibility, but from my understanding, most people who are testing it are probably using some form of unit tests for that, or some people might be, you know, like I know you could also do this in like say your YAML pipeline if you're pushing to say like merging to your main branch. You can have certain checks on a PR that basically like create your a service from your template, like create an HTTP client and like are able to like hit certain pieces of that. So you can test it in multiple ways, but I am really curious about this one. If anybody has any input.
Maybe this is a good way to send more people down to the repository and poke a little the maintainers. Because it's really great. I mean, I before I just looked at Yeoman, which is a templating system. I don't know, an npm maybe. I'm not exactly sure, and probably I'm wrong. But anyways, we have a second question, or another one from the chat. Very general. What about credentials for service creation? Can you say anything for that?
Good question. So I've been kind of trying to get around that a little bit with this demo, because I didn't want my local credentials to be in a repo. You might have, so say, so I'm making an assumption here. When you're pushing, say, your code to a remote repo and you're in a specific organization, they probably have some sort of secrets defined in your organization, whether you're using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, and you're able to reference them by using a specific like parameter that the value or that value is set to. So there's that. There's always ways you can integrate with, say, Azure Key Vault or whatever cloud service you're using. There's multiple integrations with that. You can have specific files locally if you have environment files, and there's or you can even generate them if you needed to. If, say, you're like standing up a database and you don't care what the password is at the moment, like locally, then you can probably generate something that you're not committing into a repo as well. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. It is like a tricky thing to think about, because you don't really want to store that stuff in a repository, right? But there are ways to still be able to reference that stuff.
Okay, cool. I've also linked your source code, the demo source code in the chat. We will include this also afterwards in the description again.
Yeah, excellent. And I have in the repository itself, or I guess I could have clicked on that. There are some, the demo itself is very crude, right? It's not meant to be like a good working, like it's a working service, but you might want to add something more to it. But I did have a specific structure in mind, and I put some like resources that you might like using in my repo itself. So anything that's useful that I found for the .NET template itself is in here. And then anything miscellaneous about how I set up my code and what I think is useful for the code, it's for like setting up a service, you can look at it here. Or if I used any sort of tools in my demo, you can find references to them there. And yeah, if this were a true microservice, you probably want to have your own like data store or something. You can do this with like, you can create a database with either using Docker, or, you know, you can also template out like an EF core project or whatever. Like there's so much more that you can do with it. But yeah, hope that's helpful.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, those link references are always helpful. I remember I came up with a list of links before too, especially for more like focus on the templating thing, almost exactly the same like you have. We have a second question, I think. Let me see. It didn't appear yet in StreamYard. Here it is. Are you currently using your Terraform scripts in your production deployments?
As far as company information, I can't quite say whether we're using Terraform in our production deployments or not. You can use them. I know that it's, I don't have a specific opinion on this, but I know some people are very much against it, and they're like, okay, just your dev stuff, use Terraform, and then use like something else in production. But like I said, if it's, I personally like using it in production, and I like to be able to have it defined very similarly, because then you can ensure consistency among all of your environments. But yeah, I don't know if that helps any at all.
I hope so. I think that's it. Otherwise, if additional questions appear afterwards, let's switch to my stream here. Give me a second here. You can find more information Like I said before, we've been recording this presentation. It will be up in the next few days. You can find more information about Rider, of course, on our resources. You can also follow us. If you have additional questions, you can see here on their Twitter account. Also, check again the chat for the link to the template demo. And with that said, thanks for watching. Thanks for joining. It was great to have you all here. It was great for you to have you here. Oya, thanks again to you. And
awesome.
see everyone around. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.